Greetings, everyone. We are excited to be discussing zero trust in a time when business owners are seeking valuable information to secure their business. At this time, we are going to take just a few more moments and give everyone an opportunity to jump on and get settled before we start. Hello, everyone. My name is John Flores, and I am the Business Development Manager for eTrepid, here to help guide you on your journey to compliance. I'm sure you have a lot of questions regarding zero trust strategies, so I will be sure to provide my contact information at the end of the webinar in case you want to get a hold of me or our guest speaker regarding what you hear. I would like to take a moment and introduce you to Tom Blandford, the CEO of eTrepid. Tom has a unique career path that resulted in the establishment of a company in the image of his service. As a U.S. Navy veteran, Tom's military service and information technology background led him to create and become a premier award-winning global IT services provider. For those of you who are not familiar with eTrepid, our team focuses on areas of cybersecurity, cloud computing, AI and machine learning, as well as unified communication services such as voice over IP. eTrepid services are highly customizable and can be specifically developed to meet any business needs or compliance concern. So let us continue to provide you support as you travel through your compliance journey and explore CMMC, NIST, HIPAA, or additional regulations associated with your industry. Today, we are excited to have Jerry Diedrichs and Michael Weir from Ingram Micro joining us for a little coffee and conversation. Jerry and Michael will discuss what you need to know about zero trust, how to implement it into your business, and integrating CMMC. After the presentation, we will address any questions you may have and do our best to provide you with the answers you are looking for. Additionally, if you remain on until the end of the event, you will have an opportunity to take advantage of a free BreachBits offer. We will hold questions and answers until after the presentation has concluded to give Jerry and Michael an opportunity to provide all the information they have for us today. However, please feel free to use the Q&A feature provided at the bottom of your screen to ask questions as well as leave comments in the chat section. The eTrepid team is monitoring these sections and will provide answers to your questions when we get to that portion of our conversation. Lastly, we have a number of people on today's virtual event and want to thank everyone for joining. If you were one of the first 100 people to register and you remain on for the entire event, you will receive a $10 Starbucks gift card on behalf of eTrepid. Enjoy a cup of coffee on us. After our event today, our team will follow up with you to ensure we have all the information needed so you can receive your card. For now, we're happy to host your midday pick-me-up. So grab your coffee cups and let's get started. We are delighted to have Ingram Micro Technical Consultant Jerry Diedrichs and Technical Marketing Engineer Michael Weir. Jerry has been leading Ingram Micro's Zero Trust Technical go-to-market messaging on the Zero Trust Initiative since June 2021. In this role, Jerry has been providing enablement support for partner go-to-market strategies surrounding the increasing adoption of zero trust cybersecurity model. His diverse experience as a customer department manager and systems engineer and cybersecurity channel and pre-sales engineer provides him the unique ability to see the business through the filters of the sales team and the customer, both management and hands-on engineer. Michael Weir is a CMMC RP and Tech Force specialist for security frameworks, standards, and compliance. He is also the technical marketing engineer at Ingram Micro, representing Okta and PKware. He has previously held certifications and/or positions serving Fortinet, Juniper, Cisco, WatchGuard, SonicWall, and Sophos. Thanks for joining us, Jerry and Michael. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the introduction. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. As noted, my name is Jerry Diedrichs, and I'm a technology consultant with Ingram Micro. And eTrepid is one of our partners. And one of the values that we help our partners with is to bring about provocative thought and thought leadership to our space so that we can help make this a better environment for everybody. So I'm going to take a few minutes today, talk a little bit about zero trust and what that means. This is a much maligned term in the industry, created a lot of confusion. And my goal is to try and simplify that today. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and get rolling here. So essentially we have a problem and folks want to know, well, what is that problem? And what the problem is that we've begun using internet services for commerce. So with commerce comes crime. And what that means is that where there's money, crime follows. It could be anything. And in today's world, organized crime is starting to migrate away from prohibition to internet resources and internet crime. So what comes along with that and adds to the problem are the issues of complexity. Over the years, folks have built networks and they have cobbled onto these networks, and then they'll either move on to another employer or they'll retire or otherwise leave the organization without leaving clear tracks about what they've done. So now what we have are a lot of networks that are in place, legacy, that folks not necessarily know where the back doors are or where the security weaknesses lie. Obviously, we have the human factor, and this is probably the greatest point of risk in cybersecurity is the interface between the chair and the keyboard. Now we have lack of attribution, and this really becomes one of the key issues that we face is because cybercrime is an international organization of freelance cyber criminals. We don't know who they are. They're not wearing a white hat or a black hat. They're not wearing a uniform. So we really have no way of meting out punishment or consequences for their actions. We got to be able to find them first, and that's a real issue today. And then finally, perimeter defenses that we've come to know and love over the years are slowly but surely becoming less and less effective. So the old castle, moat, drawbridge scenario, if people are getting across that drawbridge, they're getting across the moat, they're getting through the gates. And we don't necessarily know when they're in the castle and if they are, who they are. So what does all that mean? Well, it means that we've got to have a new way of doing business. So in 2018, the US government defined what they call a zero trust standard. And it's designed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a division of the Department of Commerce of the US government. And this is an organization that's fairly famous for not telling you what to do, but giving you ideas and suggestions of what you might want to try. So they've written a very comprehensive standard, and this is the definition of zero trust. And I'm not going to read this to you, but this is what they say zero trust is. I'm simplifying this for folks out of this NIST standard. And what we've come up with is a simplified version, basically saying that what it is it's a combination. It's an operational philosophy that combines least privileged software and hardware products with policy and process to allow our users access to the resources that they need when they need them, based on certain contexts, who they are, what their machine state is, what time it is, what day it is, and so forth. And we're only allowing access to resources that these users need. So the origins of this go back to, well, really to 2003 in something called the Jericho Project. But most people are aware that zero trust originated with Google's BeyondCorp initiative, which was Google wanted their folks to be able to access their resources from anywhere at any time based on who they were and their machine and certain attributes about them, rather than using a VPN. The reason why is because a VPN is a gate to everything. It's a pipe. Once you get across that pipe, the network is open. So what they've done is that they've tried to lock down access to these resources. About a year later, a Forrester analyst named John Kindervag came up with the motto of never trust, always verify. And they call this groundbreaking, but it wasn't really anything really new, but he was able to bring it to the forefront of the industry. So this is what people have come to know and love as the origins of zero trust. So the next question is why is this important? What does this mean to me? Well, what it means is that cybercrime is estimated to cost worldwide $10.5 trillion by 2025. And that's a lot of cash. If it was measured as an economy, it would be third to the US and China. So what we're doing about it? Well, we at Ingram and our other partners, our vendor partners, have come to the conclusion that a single threaded cyber approach is not necessarily as effective as when you combine resources together. And that's personified here by this braid. We believe that if you strap these things together and you take many strings, you make a strong cord. And how we do that is we're looking at different disciplines. And this isn't everything, but these are core disciplines that we believe are at least should be looked at in the beginning of any cybersecurity posture. And it starts at the top with the software-defined perimeter. And this is very similar to what's known as microsegmentation. And what that means is that a set of resources is set aside or defined as a group that isn't open to everybody. So what that means, the bad guy gets into an environment, and based on who they are, their login and that they're using or credentials, they're only allowed to see those things that we talked about earlier, the things that are predefined for them. They can't see everything. Then we move over to encryption. And encryption essentially is a simple statement. If you can't read the data, it's useless to you. So it's not really worth stealing. Privileged access management is a mechanism that allows an organization to manage their elevated or privileged login IDs and passwords. A user that manages SQL, for instance, they might have an SA login and password, and that's been shared around. It's written on sticky notes. It's under the keyboard. Well, those days are over, because what they do now is they log into this PAM, Privileged Access Management platform, and that platform audits who they are, when they got there, what they're requiring, how long they've been in the system. It checks them out, a temporary login and password that they use for the moment, and when they're done with it, it throws it away and it regenerates it. Data packet payload visibility is really critical, because this is really looking at the content as it comes in the door. What happens is that in an internet connection is that you're talking from a browser to a web server, and you have an encrypted path, and along that encrypted path, you can't see what's inside of it because it's encrypted. So if the user hits a website that's nefarious in some way, and they start downloading malicious code, you can't tell that it's in the payload. So what you have is a trusted connection from a user to a server with untrusted content within. Having the ability to see what's inside that payload is really critical to a success of any cybersecurity posture. And then finally, these last two items on this graphic essentially denote the ability to look at users' behaviors and define and baseline what they are normally, and then alert when they're unusual or anomalous. And the same holds true for server traffic. You get a data center, you have a SQL server, for instance, that manages or supports an email platform. If that server starts making connections to an engineering data store somewhere, or the patent server, or something that's really considered crown jewels, you need to know about that. And what that does is these are tools that loop back around and help you define areas of opportunity to improve upon your zero trust strategy. So what we've done at Ingram is we have some key vendor partners that we have brought to bear for these different disciplines. And we have under software-defined perimeters, partners in AppGate and OpSWAT, who do software-defined perimeter technologies. Autocomma provides encryption in a unique way. They're actually doing file and folder encryption, where what they're doing is providing what they call a key shard. So that key, rather than being stored on a central server, is actually stored on a local device, like a laptop or even an iPhone. And you would have, it breaks it up. So you could break it in two, or into thirds, or into quarters. And without the positive affirmation from all holders of those devices, that file can't be opened. So if a compromised key server, if a key server gets compromised, then they no longer have security with your keys. In this case, they can't do that because the keys are kept in different locales. Could be anywhere in the world, Bangkok, Thailand, wherever you want to go. Back to the privilege access management, BeyondTrust is one of our partners there. And BeyondTrust not only provides password management, but they also provide jump boxes, secure remote access, remote support tools, and everything that they do is audited and potentially could be recorded for playback at a later date. So if you need an audit trail, BeyondTrust is one of our better products to do that. Data packet payload visibility, TLS encryption or decryption. You want to be able to look inside those packet payloads. F5, FortiGate, Netscout all have products that'll do that, and then they'll provide a decrypted stream for inspection, and then you can make a determination whether or not the information coming in the door is malicious or not. And if it is not, then they can allow it to continue. If it is, it could toss it, discard it. And then ForcePoint provides a great product set for unusual behavior. They have dynamic data protection. They have insider threat. They have the ability to, again, baseline and monitor users' activities. And when it's anomalous or unusual, they can go ahead and report on that so that folks can do investigations. Their dynamic data processing, data protection tool, actually what it will do is it'll start ratcheting down a user's capabilities to exfiltrate data as risk grows, or as this risk score grows, until somebody can investigate to see what's going on. And the same thing holds true for network traffic. CrowdStrike, Trellix, OpsSWAT, Palo Alto all have tools that can monitor your east-west traffic in your data centers. Not to be left out, some folks want to be cloud first. And so we have a SASE, SSC strategy as well. And you'll see mainly the same players across this particular graphic, because ForcePoint and iBoss both do identity access management. They do, along with Okta, and they also do zero trust network access, which means that you go into their portal, and once you're authenticated to their portal, then your where you can go within the enterprise or within that environment is predetermined. You can't see any other resources, much like the software-defined perimeter discussion earlier. ForcePoint, data packet payload visibility, iBoss as well. They natively can inspect SSL traffic as it goes by, or TLS traffic, and crack open the payload and inspect the traffic for nefarious behavior and payloads. Cloud app security is just that. It's app-to-app security within cloud environments. Basically, what this means is that the data does not have to hairpin back to a data center for inspection. It's actually going to occur in a cloud level. So if somebody's exfiltrating bad stuff between AWS and Azure, for instance, that could be caught by this product set. And then finally, we have DLP, data loss prevention, ForcePoint's BitGlass platform, iBoss, both natively perform DLP on outbound traffic to ensure that the PII or HIPAA data, payment card information isn't being exfiltrated out of the organization. So I get asked a lot, well, how does this all align with that NIST framework? And so this table essentially is denoting how these different products play in the NIST framework. We want to be sure that we hold true to that, because everything we do at Ingram is essentially based in this NIST 800-207 standard. So call to action, what do we do now? Well, what we want to do is we want you to leverage your partner. In this case, we're talking with eTrepid, and work with your partners to arrange an assessment, get a gap analysis about your networks, determine where to start, because you can't figure out where you're going, right, unless you know where you are. Review your findings, so you know where you are to begin your journey. You want to define your priorities. What immediately needs to be addressed? Are you under, do you have an audit coming? Are you attempting to get a CMMC certification? Are you healthcare? Do you need to manage, your HIPAA requirements? So you have to figure out what your priorities are and address those first. Get a written plan, document your approach. Nothing is really a plan unless it's written down. build a schedule and execute in phases. You've got to eat the elephant a spoonful at a time. There's a lot that's going to be moving, a lot of moving parts here, and you have to have a reasonable cadence to change. So then finally, you want to observe and orient and decide and act. It's called the OODA loop. And then basically you learn from your successes and you find your opportunities to improve and you repeat your processes. And you go around in the circle and you keep doing this because this is a continuum. It's not a set it and forget it environment. So what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about some of the resources that Ingram Micro brings to bear. We have a cybersecurity line card that's publicly facing. Yeah, you can look at all the products that Ingram represents, which essentially means eTrepid does as well. We have professional services links out there for partners that work with our partner. They work together in a consortium or co-op, if you will. So if one partner doesn't have strength in a certain area, they can call on other partners to build up that strength. We have trends analysis out there, and then we have a website version of this as well. The security line card is a matrix, and then the Imagine Next web page is just that. It's a web page version of that information. So I want to thank you all for your time, and I'll hand it over to Mike.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me here. My name is Michael Weir. I'm a technical marketing engineer here at Ingram Micro, focusing on cybersecurity. I am also a CMMC registered practitioner, and I'm here today to talk to you about what Jerry just talked about, Zero Trust, and linking that to the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. I'm going to talk about it from 3 different perspectives. So we're going to talk about some relevant strands from Jerry's string there that are going to match up to some of the areas that we have to deal with in NIST 800-171, the current NIST, current CMMC level 2 standard. We're going to talk about some special considerations that have to go into your thought process and your product selection based on having to comply with that. And then we're going to talk about a few relevant products that are in addition to what Jerry said or little changes from what Jerry said. So starting out, let's take a look at the relevant strands. There's 3 I really chose to pull out here as being relevant to the CMMC. Those relevant strands are access control, identification and authentication, and systems and communication protection. And that's using the NIST verbiage. I know it doesn't totally line up with what we normally say as networking people. Let's look at the first one, their access control. So access control, when it comes right down to it, is who can get what where. I know it's a mouthful to say, but it's the management of what data or what resources can be reached by what people. So from a CMMC perspective, we're talking about CUI, controlled unclassified information, which means we need to limit access through software-defined perimeters, as Jerry talked about, or from unusual server network traffic detection, to say we're going to limit access to CUI based on the user or the process or the device or other measurable criteria we can look at to verify who's getting into there. And we want to look at the flow, of course, of an unusual server network traffic there. We want to look for the flow of CUI and look for signs of compromises or anomalies that someone may have had access to this that wasn't supposed to have access to it. Sort of like gray behaviors that aren't necessarily malicious, but there's something that is a violation of what would be your normal access control policies. Next, we want to talk about identification and authentication. Generally speaking, if we were saying that in normal cyberspeak, we'd say identity and access management or privileged access management. That is the question of who is the who and what can who do from our previous slide. I've started to sound like Dr. Seuss or something here, and I understand that. But this is the idea that you can control who is going to administer a system, not just who is going to access a system. And you can do it based on multiple criteria or factors, such as monitoring sessions, policy or privilege violations, multi-factor authentication, of course, is one of them, enrichment factors on top of that. Just to say, is this person who this person says they are? Is this device who this device says it is? And based on that, what are they allowed to see? What are they allowed to access? What settings are they allowed to change? What configuration are they allowed to do? The configuration side of thing, I think, gets forgotten more frequently than the other parts of the equation there. And last one, systems and communication protection. Obviously, as I said, CMMC is all about controlled unclassified information protection. So this is one of the major pivots that we're looking at when building out these environments. So Jerry already talked about encryption and data packet payload visibility a little bit. Reflecting back on my statement, the Dr. Seuss type thing there, the question is the what Okay, so for data packet payload visibility and encryption, kind of putting them together, the idea is that we're looking at a packet flow and protecting that packet flow. So going to encryption first, we're talking about protecting data in use, data in motion, and data at rest. So all three states that data, as well as the how, who, where, and when people can see it, and what, throw that in there too, can each person who is seeing it see. And then the data packet payload visibility is where we're looking for a sudden change in where packets are going. Does this flow suddenly contain the wrong info? Is something that's, HR files flowing to accounting, and from there flowing out to somebody who's only supposed to be seeing blueprints, where there could be some exfiltration going on, that kind of thing. Making sure that your CUI, what packages is in, and where are those packets supposed to be going. Now, the reason I put encryption and payload visibility here for another reason is that if your encryption scheme is good, it makes it easier to manage the data packet payload visibility, because, as Jerry said, some people, even if they get it, will be getting gibberish information when they get there. So that's just a quick review, me adding on to what Jerry said. Let's talk about some special considerations that come on when you're talking about it in the world of CMMC and CUI. And I'm going to look at it in terms of families of requirements based on what was in these strands we talked about before. When we're talking about the last two I talked about, encryption and data packet payload visibility, those, when you're dealing in a CMMC environment, they have to be running on FIPS 140-2 certified or validated encryption modules. And that is anything that's touching CUI or anything that's passing CUI. So it's the server it resides on, it's the device it's being accessed from. If it's a VPN, it's the encryption on that VPN. It's really a very comprehensive thing they have to look at, and it's in transit or in motion and at rest and on access. This sort of encryption has to be maintained. And as I said, it's a certified or validated implementation. NIST has a website that lists those out. This used to be, well, it still sort of is, the biggest hurdle to CMMC implementation. There was some recent guidance issued that said that specialized assets like your OT, your IoT, your IIoT, test equipment, non-CUI restricted systems, that sort of thing, they don't necessarily need to have encryption. It's only the things definitively touching CUI that need to have encryption, but keep in mind whatever products you're implementing have to have that certificate or that validated implementation. Another thing to look at when you're doing this between your software-defined perimeters and privileged access management is the idea of segmentation. So if you want to retrofit your entire deployment or build your entire deployment to be CMMC certified, that's great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. But if you have a very large environment and you're entirely retrofitting, that can get very expensive. So for a lot of people, the idea of ZTA comes down to giving as few people access as you can to as little as they possibly can access to still do their job. That means creating sub-environments within your major environments. That could be beyond just policies and VLANs. That could be literally creating pockets behind their own firewalls or pockets that can only be accessed from certain physical locations, that kind of thing. It's an environment within an environment, or even within an environment on top of that, so that you can simplify your rollout and lower your cost in implementing this whole thing. And last, when we're talking about encryption and data packet payload visibility here, I alluded to this earlier, but part of it is data loss prevention. It's controlling what data can go where and control who can see what. Part of that people underestimate is obfuscation tools. So we know about data loss prevention at the edge or data loss prevention at the machine, but another form of data loss prevention is just your shoulder looker, right? There could be someone staring over somebody's shoulder, or it could be someone who is, accessing a file for one purpose, and the file has control unclassified information or even personally identifiable information in it that could be used for another purpose that someone has to see, but not another. It's the controlling who can see what, not just what can leak where, but who can see what where. With that, let me give you a few relevant products. Now, Jerry gave you a bunch. I'm going to highlight a few separate. I'm highlighting some of his. I'm going to highlight a few others separately. In terms of access management, Jerry told you about Beyond Trust. AppGate is another great one to use for remote access management. They also have a great SDP suite if you want to go with them. For MFA, Okta, of course, is a great product there. They're top of the line in terms of everything you can roll out. Network access controller. This is something that's a little bit of an older technology as opposed to all the things we're talking about zero trust access, but it's still a very powerful tool for having on your site to just control what can get where on the network. For those looking at something that is FIPS 140-2 validated and certified, Aruba ClearPass is a great place to go with that. In terms of unusual traffic, SIM is a place to go, security, incident, and event management. Now, if you have the people and the know-how and the time to implement your own SIMs, Cisco and IBM make great SIMs. If you don't, there are SIM as a service vendors like AlienVault who can manage that for you and send alerts to you and generally monitor your environment so you don't have to have that heavy lift up front of installing and tuning your own SIM. In terms of data security, encryption and data loss prevention, most people are pretty familiar with. When I was talking about obfuscation, I was referring to a vendor known as PKware. PKware, they are not a data loss prevention product per se, or a full encryption product per se. What they are is they do both of those to a certain extent, but they find your data and they say based on access policies and that sort of thing, what data has to be pulled out. So can somebody access a certain file, but there's redaction going on there, that sort of thing. And then last, the software-defined perimeters. I already mentioned AppGate. There's one other vendor I want to mention on here called SyncDog that people discredit, or I shouldn't say discredit, people don't even remember exists. SyncDog is similar things to data loss prevention, software-defined perimeters, general protection, encryption, that kind of thing, but for mobile devices. So for those that have, traveling tablets or phones or things that are corporate devices, they might access CUI on. This gives protection to those devices to cover that edge of your network as well. All right, thank you for watching. Don't forget to realize the promise of technology.
Jerry and Michael, thank you for being flexible with the information you provided today and ensuring everyone is informed about Zero Trust and CMMC. As anticipated, we do have some questions in the queues, so let's invite eTrepid CEO Tom Blandford on to help provide the answers. Remember, if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature provided at the bottom of the screen to share, and we will try to answer your questions as best as possible. Our first question is, what is the current CMMC standard or requirement?
So I'll take that one, John. The current one is CMMC 2.0. And for those that say, well, what is that? The answer is something. It's in public comment right now. CMMC 2.0 right now is exact copy of for level 1, it's CFR 52.204.21. For level 2, it's NIST 800.171, or for level 3, it's NIST 800.172. There's some other documents. I can give you a laundry list after this if you want. There's some other documents that the CMMC AV is said to consider when doing your rollouts, but the long and short of it is that for the next 9 to 24 months, it's in public comment, so it's subject to change. And that's why I say my answer is a little bit questionable on that. One thing to say, though, is that all of those 1, 2, and 3 levels I just mentioned do have requirements regarding identity and access management and other things that are relevant to ZTA. So it's not as though you could say, oh, I'm level 1, I don't have to worry about this, or something along those lines, or, oh, might not be in the final standard. This is something that's going to be in the final standard in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, thank you, Michael. The next question is, do I absolutely have to have all of these products in my environment?
I'll take that one. That's a great question, and really the answer is going to depend upon use case and requirements of the organization at the time. But this whole zero trust journey is really a blending of product, as I said earlier, process, policy, training. But the use of best of breed products is what we're considering to be the best approach here for good cybersecurity posture. And what we want to do is as I said earlier, we want to bring to bear the right technology at the right time for each business. It almost doesn't matter what order you do this, as long as you do the deployments in order that makes sense for the use case. Right now it's not a time to cut corners, though. Really, most organizations are trying to do as little as possible with their cyber because of its expense and its complexity, and that's really what's impacting the success overall with the posture worldwide. So good enough isn't good enough is my statement. I say this all the time, but it also has to be blended with the pragmatic reality of budgets and staffing.
And I'll throw in my 2 cents on that too regarding CMMC, is that CMMC doesn't necessarily require any product, though the fact that you need encryption on certain things sort of implies that. It's a set of abilities. And in most cases, it's much easier to have a product doing these abilities than it is to have somebody sit down and do them manually or do a pen and paper or something along those lines. It could become virtually impossible to scale that.
Okay, thank you for the answer. The third question is, we use Active Directory and two-factor authentication right now. Do we really need to do zero trust access?
That's another great question. And, this goes back to legacy operations, really. Back in the day, Active Directory was the great tool, and it said, hey, this person could access this particular application. You put them in an Active Directory group, or created a group policy, and then the miracle occurred. You can actually use an app. What we're attempting to do now is we're attempting now to reduce the attack surface, and to do that we have to limit visibility to the surface. So that's where this comes back to. There's a little bit of difference between authentication that allows access to applications, but they really don't prevent somebody browsing the network and looking for the keys to the kingdom, looking for the crown jewels. And that's, Active Directory has no visibility to people that are in the networks at the network layer 2, layer 3. It has no clue that anybody's out there, and that's what we want to stop. So what happens is that they dwell in the network, and according to the latest Mandiant report, there's a dwell time of an average of about 21 days, but it used to be months. That bad guys would get in these networks, and they would just watch and log and make a decision about their approach. And then usually it'd become a Friday afternoon on a 3-day weekend, that they would make their move. So what we want to do is stop the ability of bad guys and gals to steal credentials, elevate their logins, which will then allows them to install malicious code such as ransomware. So removing that trust, removing that visibility is really what we want to get to, because if you can't see it, you can't compromise it.
Yeah, just to chime in here real quick on that. One of the #1 threats to your environment is the insider threat. So you want those protections in place every day, just for the potential that you could have an employee that goes rogue or does something to delete or destroy the data or leave behinds, things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. I touched on that a little bit in the presentation earlier when we talk about looking at user behavior. And so, user entity behavioral analytics is really an insider threat tool. It's a mouthful. I know, it's starting to sound like Dr. Seuss myself. But the point here is that you have to monitor what's going on inside your organization, not only from that insider threat perspective, which is key here, because you got a lot of guys out there that, well, you have a lot of guys that are doing bad things intentionally, and you have a lot of employees that are doing things unintentionally, and you have to have a mechanism to monitor and mitigate that. But the other thing to remember is that there's a lot of folks that are out there today that are sending employees emails and saying, hey, we'll pay you a large sum of money if you install our malware in your environment so we can start stealing your company's information. And that type of tool that Tom just brought up is a great way of thwarting that threat as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom and Jerry. The question number 4 is, can a good firewall and VPN meet all of the CMMC requirements?
Most likely no. I suppose if you're only level 1 and you're in a small enough environment, like literally 1 or 2 user environment, probably only 1 user environment, it might be possible. But the thing is that almost any modern environment is going to have more than one attack surface, or more than one edge. So when you have a firewall, you're only protecting one point of entry, or protecting WAN to LAN. But you're not protecting if something were to get into an endpoint. You're not protecting even if somebody got a reverse proxy in there or something like that. You're not protecting against any other invasions. Data is not being encrypted. We're not looking at people's behaviors. Pretty much all the things on Jerry's strand graphic there that I borrowed from my part of the presentation aren't being done by just a firewall, and therefore are putting in places where you could compromise the controlled and classified information in your environment.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question. We don't allow corporate devices to go offsite. Do we still need to implement zero trust?
And another great question. You would think no, but really the short answer is yes. And the reason I say that is because compromised access occurs with devices anywhere, whether they're offsite or on-site. Because what's happening is that in many cases, over 90% of the events are occurring through malicious email links. And so that machine being in the organization or outside the organization, the risk is similar because you have this trusted communications going out encrypted across the internet from a trusted place, a trusted machine, trusted user to an untrusted website that you don't know is bad until the data starts coming in your door. So, this is what we call the old Trojan horse. And what we want to do is we want to avoid that by a best practice that you apply everywhere without exception. And that's the greatest threat in cyber today is folks making a decision. Can I get around that? Should I not do that? That's no big deal. It is a big deal. And we need to really stay the course, hold the line. Don't make any exceptions to policy and procedure unless it's discussed and approved through a change management process.
And just to throw on 2 cents and throw that the other way, if it's not about corporate devices leaving the environment, if you have BYOD devices coming into the environment, that's another layer of vulnerability related to device movement that you need to consider, just to reverse the question there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question. If I have more than one DoD contract, do I need more than one zero trust environment?
So that's enough of a misconception that the CMMCAB has actually addressed it directly at. And the answer to that is not necessarily, most likely not, but it's based on your own architecture. You can have multiple federal contracts or multiple prime, subprime contracts in the same environment, provided that the environment is secure to the highest level of the bunch. So if you have, a whole bunch of level 1 contracts and one level 2 contract, then the environment in which you're functioning, if they're all grouped together, has to be level 2. That said, though, there can be a major cost savings if you have 5 level 1 projects and 1 level 2 project to make a micro environment for that level 2 project and leave all the level 1s in a separate environment, because it is expensive to retrofit an entire environment, less expensive to build from the beginning, to make something CMMC level 2 or level 3 compliant. So really it's an architectural question more than it is any kind of actual standards requirement question.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. There's a last question here. We only have a few users in our CMMC environment. Do we still need to implement zero trust?
Yeah, I guess that kind of goes back to what I said earlier on the question regarding the firewall for can just a firewall and VPN do it? Basically, any size of environment you're looking at is vulnerable to the same threats. It's just how big the attack surface or threats is. Like, even if you just have 1 or 2 people in an environment, impersonation, unintentional insider threats like Jerry was referring to before, stolen credentials, man in the middles, all these things are things you're still vulnerable to regardless of the size of your environment, as long as there's at least 1 person in it. Those are all things that can still happen to you. Hopefully they don't.
Yeah, I'd just like to chime in one thing here as well. So we've met with the DHS and FBI counterintelligence agents for the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And they are arresting, foreign agents who are embedding in the communities around, military installations, intelligence agencies, and things like that. They recently arrested a young couple in their early 20s, planted here by the Russians. One worked as an accountant for an assisted living. The other worked at a daycare, and they were living in a community that was connected to near the Pentagon, and they assume identities of people who passed away at a very young age, 1 or 2 years old. They they embed in the community fairly easily, and they do what was discussed earlier, where they're able to gain some advantage and get inside your environments, or get around and just join the group, be at the table to listen in and gain information, where they can use social engineering and other means and methods to access your system. So if you're thinking, I'm too small, well, you're not. If you're if your environment has value, and they will find ways to penetrate whichever ones they can gain access to.
And I don't know if we have, I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
I was just going to say, I don't know how you guys are doing on time. I have a really fast story that'll actually corroborate what Tom just went through. We have a large, I live in the Seattle area. We have a large aerospace company called Boeing. And a lot of small businesses support their supply chain here locally. And there's a shared fiber optic network in a town north of us here that these small businesses were using for internet access. And they basically, quite by accident, saw a large degree of traffic occurring in the middle of the night. And it turned out that through that small business, a nation state government was actually trying to get into the Boeing network through their supply chain connection. So this is personification, exactly what Tom's talking about. It doesn't matter how big or small you are, you can still be a cog in the machine of data exfiltration that you don't want to be a part of.
Indeed, a lot of great questions. Thank you all. Jerry and Michael, once again, thank you for adding to our coffee and conversation by taking the time to share information with everyone today.
Thank you, sir.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for having us.
Okay, so right now we would like to introduce Jacob Foster from BreachBits to explain our offer for today's webinar. Jacob, the floor is now yours.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. I was excited to hear the talk today about Zero Trust and CMMC. My name is Foster Davis from BreachBits. I am a CMMC registered practitioner and a Navy vet. While you're on your journey for CMMC and Zero Trust, very important items that you all were able to discuss today. While you're on that journey, make sure you're validating what you believe to be true is actually in place. Always know where you stand. Make sure that you know how to track where your stack of security is and how it's performing, and why not do it with the perspective of people like me, hackers. This season at BreachBits, we are excited to announce the release of a standard that we call Breach Risk. It's a 10-point scale to help you do everything I mentioned easily and integrate even into your enterprise risk management. So as you're going through this journey, make it easier on yourself. Allow us to test your full security stack. And along the way, don't forget your supply chain and your cloud. And so what I am happy to provide here to our friends and colleagues of eTrepid and the audience is what we are going to provide based on our launch this quarter. We're very excited. Is we're actually going to provide over $5,000 in services over 1 month. We will provide these services to allow you to check your supply chain, check your cloud, and the first 10 to sign up will also conduct our very potent spear phishing to check your full security stack from open to click to execute and beyond. Good luck with your CMMC and Zero Trust journey, and I hope to talk to you soon. Back over.
If you would like to gain insight into achieving and maintaining HIPAA compliance, we invite you to join us for dinner at Morton's Steakhouse in Bethesda, Maryland. Experts from eTrepid and the Compliancy Group will be available to answer any questions you may have after a brief presentation focused on the latest information regarding HIPAA and healthcare. To register, simply scan the code that is on the screen or use the link provided in the chat. We will reach out to confirm your attendance and look forward to seeing you there. If you have any general questions about services or want to learn more about Zero Trust, CMMC, our upcoming event, or our offer for you today, feel free to contact me or Keith. Our information is listed on the screen. In the meantime, we will send you a survey and we would love to hear what you thought about the information received, as well as how we can better prepare you for your cybersecurity journey. Also, feel free to follow us on social media if you're interested in getting updated industry information or join our news blast list. You can check us out at eTrepid.com or search for @eTrepid on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you.